The headline is The Reality Behind The Undertaker, and I've got to be honest, guys, I'm not going to mince words here. I'm just going to come right out and say a lot about what I have heard in my time as a wrestling judge. The Undertaker is one of the most popular and well-respected men that wrestling has ever seen, to the point that almost every big name in wrestling has seemingly hundreds of positive stories about the guy. Unfortunately, there is a lot more to Mark Calaway than has been made publicly available. I'm going to share a story or two that I've heard, so if you'd like to live in ignorance for a little longer, look away now. For those who don't know, hi, I'm Tom Colahue. This is a video on YouTube that's come straight from our twitch.tv/Tom Colahue live spoiler warnings. The concept of wrestler's court has come up time and time again, and is something of a legend amongst wrestling fans. There are some who speak incredibly highly of their experiences, but what is very clear is that certain people ruled wrestler's court unopposed. John Bradshaw Layfield was actively recognised as a, and I quote, prosecutor. Meanwhile, the final decision, the judge, jury and executioner, was almost always The Undertaker. Edge and Christian have openly explained exactly how they were able to get themselves out of trouble at wrestling court, and this I'd imagine applies to many people. Bribery. They were able to convince The Undertaker to brush the whole thing under the carpet because there was a little tiny bit of corruption at the top. What happened to people who weren't able to manage that? That's the question I'm asking. Well, at the time, violence was the answer. Those that fell foul in wrestler's court either suffered a significant backstage beating, usually in wrestler's court in front of other wrestlers, or, just as often, found themselves wrestling against someone who would no-sell their offense and genuinely beat the hell out of them in front of thousands of screaming fans. They would beat the hell out of them and nobody would be allowed to help, and they wouldn't be able to fight back or face more trouble from wrestler's court and The Undertaker. The Undertaker didn't just endorse this, he encouraged it. He made the decisions. The stories that we've heard about JBL come under the stewardship of Mean Mark Callis. Recently, reports have emerged stating that The Undertaker oversaw general backstage bullying. Lots of defecation in bags and the destruction of gear, which I still can't work out why that would be the choice that they make. So, between seeing people beaten during matches, ruining their belongings, and essentially deciding on a whim who would be the guy at the very bottom of the totem pole, Mark Calaway had as much say in who succeeded in wrestling as Vince McMahon himself did. People were forced out of the WWF en route to WCW, and indeed forced out of the WWE because they couldn't handle the constant bullying. The Undertaker was known to hold people back because those same people upset him in some way. Sometimes, apparently, with no cause that anyone else even recognised. Looking back at the WWE under The Undertaker, certain people simply didn't make the top level. Reasons suggested or shared have been accusations of disrespect against The Undertaker, not serving the established talent with drinks, car valets, and at times even massages, and possibly worst of all, just showing that you don't enjoy being bullied. The culture at the time was don't sell it, and I don't think we're that far removed now. The culture at the time was pretend that it didn't happen, bury your head, and don't expect anyone to help you. It's no wonder that all the big names have great things to say about The Undertaker, when The Undertaker basically decided who succeeded. We still hear about wrestlers getting their dicks out, sometimes just slapping you in the face with it. We still hear about very unseemly behaviour in the showers. We've very recently had a whole speaking out movement, and wrestling, by and large, you guessed it, no-sold it. Perhaps Leo Rush was right to be annoyed that, in the WWE, he was expected to run around serving more established names. You think Brock Lesnar ever went around giving everyone water after their matches, checking that they were okay and just giving them a little rub down? Not impossible. I don't think it's hard to recognise that the WWE is under much better stewardship with Roman Reigns in situ. That said, we really do not need to see a return to those days. And I don't care how often The Undertaker speaks up and says, "Oh, but they're always playing video games. What a shame, it's better than the crap you pulled." Wrestling as a whole needs to do better. This behaviour is occurring much less, but it is still occurring. Basically, the age of The Undertaker needed to end, and we should all be very, very glad that it did. I was a huge fan of The Undertaker. When he seemingly retired at WrestleMania 33, I genuinely shed many a tear. Then I started learning about the man behind the mask, essentially. The Undertaker will always be over for me. Mark Callis will never be. Ed says, "I'm surprised how many people are shocked about the terrible things that happen behind the scenes in pro wrestling, especially after speaking out. There is a lot of bury your head in the sand from wrestling fans. I do feel that wrestling as a whole informs a lot of wrestling fans. You see a lot of wrestling journalists basically acting like wrestlers at times, engaging in storylines, creating drama, putting promos on each other. You see a lot of that. You see fans with 'I am a heel' in their tagline. You're not a heel. You're not. You are just an arsehole. That's the situation. That's the reality of the situation. But there is a lot of burying heads in sand right now. We all, collectively, need to stick our necks up, stick our head above the parapet and say, this is not a... And don't act shocked, you knew this. Wrestling, in general, is a microcosm of life much as anything else is. In a group of 10 people, probably 6 or 7 of them are kind of dickheads. Not all of them are unforgivable dickheads. I'd only say 1 or 2 are unforgivable. But you get a couple of dickheads, a couple of people who are just insecure and acting out, a couple of people who are really insecure and willing to do whatever it takes, and then a couple of people who just aren't willing to look at what. Thankfully, there are still good people in the world. A lot of them are here in this chat. Yeah, the table says, "I'll take my locker room playing video games." Me too. Me too. Huge fan of Xavier Woods. And what he's been able to create in the WWE. Pardon me. He's as much a leader as Roman Reigns is. Although if you ask Roman Reigns to play Call of Duty, he's going to play Call of Duty. Craig says, "The boys in the back mentality is such BS. There's only so many times the 'that's how it was back then' excuse can be used. I believe that amount of times is 0, to be completely honest with you. I don't give a shit how it was back then. It shouldn't have been like that back then. That's the case. It shouldn't have been like that back then. But it was. I'm glad it's not like that anymore, but that doesn't mean this moment won't come again at some point.